From the depths of Khazad-dûm to the wonderful dinner tables of Elendil and the shores of Numenor and the newly christened Mordor. Welcome to Casterly Talk. That was a sad thing to say. This is episode 7, The Eye of the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. This was an emotional one. This was a sad one. And frankly, I need some friends. I need some friends to help me out with this very, very, very depressing and emotional episode. And so I am joined today, first and foremost, by, oops, we don't need that more than once. Stop it there. You stop it, you music, you. Already trying to play me off like we're at the Oscars. We are going to start, of course, with our lore master, Rachel Cushing Levine of the Noldor, commander of the Northern Armies. How are you, Rachel?
I'm very good. This was quite the episode. I had at least 4 out loud exclamations. So I'm excited to dig into it.
I have a feeling we are all going to share one, but to fully do that, I met this guy while I was out at sea on a raft, and he seems kind of shady, but I also think he might be the true king of the Southlands, or at least the true king of Texas. And that is my friend and partner, Nicky Kumar. What's up, man?
Oh, man, yeah. A lot to digest. But as you were saying earlier, you needed friends. I need friends to talk about this. And yeah, I had a blast last time I was on, so it's a pleasure to be back on Casterly Talk with you.
Yeah, bringing you both together in lieu, of course, of King Ken Knapsack, who, I don't know, I guess he's in Valinor again, but we'll soldier on with that.
He can't stay away. I totally understand, though.
I hear it's really nice.
I need to see Ken doing the singing now on the boat.
Oh, 100%. But there would absolutely be a guitar solo or something added in there, which would be very joyful and wondrous. And maybe by the end of this episode, the three of us will tell each other our true dwarven names. I think that might be an interesting opportunity. So we're going to break this down. A lot happened in this. We had the fight of the Durins, the ideological battle in Khazad-dûm. We had sort of the reckoning of the Harfoots, and the actual sort of, at least for, one chapter for them, distinctly over, societally and personally, it might seem. And a Hobbit foursome has formed, a little group to go on a trek, which we know about that. And then we move over to Mordor, which, if you weren't clear on that, the very Sam Raimi-esque font choice at the end really let you know. Rachel, you're reacting to that. We were going to talk about that. I love the cheese and respect it, but I was kind of taken aback.
A little, as soon as he says, it's no longer the Southlands, I thought the cheese was going to be him saying it's Mordor.
Right.
And then instead to do it with the font, I was a little interesting choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when the Southlands first came up, I thought, no, they're not going to do a change.
Right. But it's so interesting because Mordor is actually a Sindarin word, an Elvish word. So it would make sense if Adar, having been an elf and now an Uruk, coming up with the word. So I just figured he'd say it. So it was strange not to. And then I'm by far not the first person to say this, but why didn't they do it with the maps? Because they've been using the maps in such interesting, great ways up until this point. To me, that would have followed suit with what they were doing. They've never done that. They've never had the fade up of the text and then change. It was like I said, an interesting choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will get there. And the way that I sort of want to do this is we're going to break it sort of by storyline, because we're back in the mode of having all of them, which sometimes we've left some of them out so we could focus on one thing, like we did definitely in Udun, as that entire episode. But here in The Eye, we'll talk about that title. Obviously, it has very cinematic Lord of the Rings implications. That's something that even somebody that saw the trilogy once would be able to say, oh, yeah, that's a thing. But let's talk about these storylines, starting with you, Rachel. Where do you want to go? What hooked you, and what was the big one in terms of where you were most emotionally affected, thematically affected? I feel like I know what you're going to say, but I want you to
it's
say
not
it.
even a contest, but Elrond and Durin are just the MVPs of this show for all the reasons, for specifically for the emotion, for the. When you watch shows like this, you watch them and you're like, I want to be their friend, or I want to have a beer with them, or I want to have a sword fight with them. You know what I mean? You relate to them in different ways. And they, to me, are just the heart and soul of this whole thing. And that's what makes it so heartbreaking when Durin goes against his father in that way. And all the ideas of family and all the ideas of blood and all fire is up, down, left, sideways, a theme in this entire episode. And the fact that dwarves were made from rock and fire, and Durin III's entire speech about that, justifying his decision, but ultimately it coming down to, we don't want to help elves cheat death. That sounds very anti-elvish to me, like very much across the board. It's been established this season, but everything, like Durin, like in tears, telling Elrond that they can't help them. I was in tears. Yeah. And their conversation down in the mines when they're taking a break, they're ribbing each other 1 second about Elrond having maybe thrown the contest, to Durin nearly divulging his secret dwarvish name, which is such a symbol of what that relationship means to him. And then to literally call him a brother, which upsets Durin III so much. Like everything about that, it's forwarding the story, but it's forwarding first and foremost their characters and the emotions that exist within that relationship. And it just, every time they're on screen, Disa too, I'm just like, give me all of this. Everything about this is working on every level for me.
Yeah, this storyline is definitely the one that I think has become sort of the, like you said, these are our, of course, there are many stars, but this is our core duo. This thematically represents the race relation stuff that's happening here. The idea of looking beyond yourselves happening here. And Nicky, to throw it over to you to dive into how you felt about the Khazad-dûm storyline. This, immediately after the episode, was one of the first things that you and I talked about in terms of the one that got you emotionally, was this concept of him being sort of the elvish dwarf and him being the dwarvish elf, and then to have the elvish farewell. So Nicky, talk about this storyline and how you felt about it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it was one that because it is such a core piece of how we love this show, it felt weird not having it for an episode, right? Like for as stacked as Udun was, it was like, it's nice to have him back. And then to do so with like really, really heavy character moments, I thought was, it's one thing to say, here's all this heavy Southland stuff, now let's go to another part, and they're all light and cheery, and it's not. It's like the relief from the plight of the Southlanders is replaced, or is a series of really deep heart-to-heart conversations that challenge each other, grow relationships, ruin relationships, and I mean, like as of now, I believe Durin is disinherited, right? Like,
and so apparently there's a brother. That's the first time we've heard that, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I knew that. Like, they had the conceptually brothers was thrown around, but a Durin brother was sort of like the and we've continued sort of that trend of the off-screen sibling with Anarion. Like, you're in the season 2 cast along with a certain husband that we'll be talking about. So
talk about aha moments.
We'll be talking about that. But Nicky, continue. Continue with that.
I think, and then with the I really loved the Namarie scene, and just there's something about that, like even outside of Tolkien lore and universe, like just those levels of like that trope of like, it's not just goodbye. I always love that. Even in things that are totally opposite, the Auf Wiedersehen scene in Django Unchained, like just where it's like, it means something else too. Like I always love those kind of things, and it was one of those things where like you felt the love between these two characters, and I'll include Disa, like these 3 characters together have this bond, and I just thought it was really moving, and just always this concept of saying bye. I'll even throw ET, right? Like I'll be right here, right? It's more than just bye, right? Like I always love that kind of thing. So that really got me.
For this race that is, for all intents and purposes, immortal outside of certain cases and murder and war, for them to have that perspective makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense thematically. It makes perfect sense in the lore. It made me think of in Spanish, vaya con Dios, like go toward God. And this was sort of the whole idea of is go toward goodness, move toward goodness, or toward good. This idea that in the episode, which if we're gonna hang our hats on one theme here, I would propose this, and then of course everybody else, if you have yours as well, let's talk about them as we move. But overarching, to borrow from another fantasy, like I said this on Twitter, it's the greatest teacher failure is. The lowest points hit across every storyline here. A new king is wounded. A new alliance is shattered because of the old ways. The Harfoots, my God, talk about a shock moment. We'll get there. But this idea that Elrond, in the face of his own destruction, because that's what he's just found out, he's keeping it together for his friends. But in the face of, not only did I fail, we're all going to die, and he can still leave them with a go toward good, even when I'm not there. Rachel, talk about that in terms of how you felt, but also in terms of the elven knowledge that you have, because I don't want to like pigeonhole you, because this has been your life's fandom, but it seems like if you had to rank them, the elves would be your focus.
They were my favorite characters as a kid, and even as I grew up reading all the stories, you know, they remained my favorite characters. It helps that in the Silmarillion there's a lot of them and a lot of great ones. And I've always thought Elrond is one of the single most interesting because he's half elven, and not even just half human and half elven. He's also part Maya, so he is a truly distinct and unique character in the lore, to which he actually talks about that, like, being that he has an interesting perspective, and that's why he's the one down on his knees begging for this kind of help. The one thing I will say is that I don't think that the elves would die if they stayed in Middle Earth. What this is going to do is, I think, send them to sail across the sea sooner than they want to. Sure. Because the overarching story of the elves was they were born, or they were created in Middle Earth. Many of them fled to Aman to be with the Valinor because Morgoth took over. And then a whole bunch of them sailed back to Middle Earth to get back the Silmarils, but also to go out on their own for the sake of adventure, for the sake of self, for, you know, not always just sitting at the foot of the Valar. So they've had this back and forth thing so much, but they, at their heart, do love Middle Earth. And so many of them stayed after the War of the Wrath because of that love. And so now, to me, it's actually not even just about them dying. It's about them having to abandon Middle Earth again. And that's, you know, because they would die there. That's the point I was taking. And so Namarie is, you know, Elrond is not necessarily going to die, but he's going to sail beyond the Pale. He's not going to be able to ever see Durin again. So it is a kind of death, especially to their relationship.
Right.
But yeah, it's such a beautiful concept, as you guys were saying. And, you know, juxtaposed with, you know, Elrond understanding the Khazad-dûm earlier. So Elrond understands Dwarvish. And in this case, it's Durin that says Namarie before Elrond does, so he speaks a little Elvish, and it's just that back and forth of, you know, these two are honestly on a different level than the Legolas-Gimli relationship. These two bridge and create a friendship amongst two races that have always had difficulty doing that. One of the things I'm curious about, especially because you guys are big Lord of the Rings fans and you know the films, the idea of Doran's Bane, and we did see the Balrog at the end of the episode. Initially, and the line that we all know from the movies is the dwarves dug too greedily and too deep and awakened Doran's Bane. So dwarves in the lore are very stalwart, brave, loyal, but they're also greedy. It's like a part of their nature. And one of the things that is sort of hinted at with that is that they were the ones that delved for the mithril and therefore awoken the Balrog, and that would be the destruction of Khazad-dûm. Keep in mind, that's not supposed to happen for another age. So either they're speeding up the timeline a lot, or they're just, you know, reminding us he's down there. I'm not really sure.
Sure, yeah.
But it's such an interesting back and forth, because if you look at it that way, then Durin III's in the right. He's understanding that there are some boundaries. We shouldn't dig, because not only is it potentially dangerous and dwarven lives are at stake, but he also says that, like, they're in danger of the shadow. So it's, I'm not saying that he knows the Balrog is there, but I think he knows that there is a point to which their greed could get them into trouble. And
Yeah.
so it's such a great juxtaposition to have Durin IV wanting to do it for the sake of the elves, but you still also get like, this is the greatest treasure we could ever unearth. And it's not even just about the elves. It's I would move a mountain, as you said you had a dream of, or a premonition that I would do. So there, he wants to help his friends. That is absolutely there, but he is a dwarf, and he knows that there is a treasure trove of this incredibly rare thing that will not only save his best friend and keep him in Middle Earth and save his people, but also put his name on the map.
And ring in a new era.
All the mountains.
His
and
whole
all
thing
that
that was like a big trailer line, a new era. And we were, and then we didn't know how much we would love this guy and how sensitive he would be and how emotionally vulnerable he would be. But what I love what you're bringing up there with the Balrog. First of all, I mean, there's like, it's Balrog, but then like, but there's also like a couple times this episode, sort of the Sam Raimi font change at the end, which is what I'm committed to it being, because that's exactly what it was. And the leaf going down to the Balrog. I was saying to you, Nicky, last night, like I thought, oh, is that leaf going to burn? That'll be kind of clever if it just burned up in the air. And then we saw it sleeping, and I was like, oh, that's a lot. And then it was awake. And so it sort of raises these questions of condensing the timeline. And we'll talk about, more predictive stuff at the end about what we think. But there's these themes that keep showing up that Adar has spoken to a lot of. The lies run so deep. They're in the mountains. They're in the trees. And it's like, could this show be doing its own take on, it was elves, but the dwarves got blamed in the history? Or is it something like the light of the Silmarils in the stuff is keeping him sleeping? Is keeping him like subdued? Like you could do lots of different things with the pieces that they've introduced.
Right. And what it is, it's the victors write history. That's always been the case in the real world. It's one of the things that Martin does so well with Game of Thrones too, is the story you've been told is not necessarily the true story, especially if it's thousands of years later. And while I don't think it should be they went after the mythal just to save the elves, that's changing it too much for me. You can't rework the dwarven nature that Tolkien has included in here, but you can muddy it. You can make it gray. All we see is gray. Like there is so much work that this show does,
especially with the
realize. Right. And then that's through, I mean, all the ash and the gray and what happens to Miriel, like that's an overarching theme that things just don't always live in the pure light, pure dark. And everybody has to maneuver within that. So this is just another example of potentially Durin IV doing something from his heart for this brother figure, but also beneath that having an ambition with it. And that is also a piece of why they're going to delve too greedily and too deep and, start their own demise eventually. And that's so much the interesting part of this is a prequel. We know where all this is going. Yeah. So much of this is them finding new ways to get us there that we hadn't considered.
Especially with the other elements, like goblins are going to be an element, and it wasn't just the Balrog. To my understanding, that was directly it wasn't just Balrog versus every dwarf. It was, there was a lot of factors that happened in this fall. And to your point about like muddying, I'm not at all saying that. I never thought this guy would come up in a Lord of the Rings conversation, but I'm not saying that David Fincher's stuff is similar to Lord of the Rings. But David Fincher, the other day I saw a video with him, probably on that screenwriting account we both follow, Nicky, that was talking about the conversations that I'm interested in are the ones where every single person has the righteous argument. And who's right morally here between the two Durins, and who hasn't had a conversation with that about their parents. This is definitely the parent episode in general, with a lean toward fathers, just because there's more fathers than mothers, but of course Bronwyn still being an important factor, and a scene that made me tear up. But yeah, Rachel, what you're talking about there is so interesting, and I love the way that they have given themselves enough license, as we knew they would with this, to do unexpected things, but they still haven't gone out of a way that feels like thematically counter, like you're saying with the dwarven nature. Like, I'll throw it to you, Nicky, to start this point, but connecting to what you said, Rachel, about you can't change the dwarven nature of greed. And so far in the show, I have loved one woman so deeply, and she has a moment of some pretty dark greed there, and that's decent.
I was going to say, look, Lady Macbeth vibes. Take it away.
Oh my goodness! Yes. I thought that. I didn't want to think it because it made me feel dirty. So, Nicky, how did you feel about Disa having this moment of like, I know we talked earlier about not bashing each other's parents, but and she
Yeah.
sort of walked that back.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a surprise. It wasn't something I expected from her character, because, you know, obviously we saw the ride or die nature with Durin when Elrond's like, well, why is this stuff here? Why are you making this meal? And she, you know, and she covered it all up, and she knew what she was doing. So we always knew that there was this, like, I'll stand by my husband till, you know, the end of time. But I don't think we ever really thought it would go to this this level of, like, you know, screw the king. Like, you know, this is over. We got this. This is all ours. I think that was the part that, like, especially got me. She's like, this is all ours. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay. And yeah, I mean, it is such an interesting thing, because it's like, you know, just to rewind it a little back to Durin III, it's like, when he was talking, it almost felt like that meme of, like, the worst person you know just made a great point.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's like damn, that's right. I mean, and I also love his concept of shadow, where it's like, he doesn't know. I don't think he knows what's down there, but it's almost very like Winter is Coming. It's like his version of that. It's like, I know something bad is out there, and, you know, whatever, you know, something is, there's just bad stuff is waiting.
And
for
he
us.
keeps invoking the old mythology of their people, and you can make and of course, down to their beard colors, who is fire and who is stone. Is it stone or rock, whichever actual verbiage he says. But yeah, to your point about the worst person, it's like he's saying, like, I know where we come from and what we were created, and in that is a suspicion that I am speaking to.
So yeah, I think it makes him right in that moment, maybe not for the right reasons, but it's still like, you know, in the end, that is, the facts are, they're going to ruin their society by following this path. Whether it's, you know, maybe it's like, you know, they get enough for the elves, whatever the elves want, and then they're like, well, let's keep going. You know?
Yeah.
Sure.
The chisel's hot, right? Let's
or alternatively, like, we get whatever X amount is, and then Gil-galad could be the one that's like, and while we're down here, we'll be relieving you of your duties, and we will be doing the rest, because, you know, he's still that factor too, and he wasn't present here, but that sort of race relation stuff looms over all of this. And I have loved the right of Sigyn Tarag since it happened, but it wasn't until after this episode that I was like, what does that even mean? And then I realized that it's them, it's Durin's line, the Longbeards, in their language. And so the fact that Durin was able to invoke, essentially saying the right of your family, sort of teed up that brother thing before, you know, Rachel, I'm sure you knew, because you probably speak every language in this fluently. But now that it's there at the present, and that comes back, and that's the basis of their brother conversation. How do both of you feel? Whoever wants to jump in first, or we bounce back to Rachel, I guess, then we'll bounce back again. This idea of the line is hanging over everything. Elrond's been brought into that conversation. Ideologically, we've sort of laid out where they are, but this line sort of having fracturing now, and we know it will go on. That's the prequel storytelling aspect of it. But there's this element of who's going to define it, and how is it going to, what is the change of power going to be? I half expected when he took his piece of armor off, I expected a father-son right of Sigyn Tarag to go down. I almost thought he was going to challenge him. So how did you think about all of that stuff?
Yeah, well, this is couched in the fact that we have a season finale next week.
Yeah.
So to me, they set up a father-son showdown, like a bigger one, because we've also established that the other dwarven lords, or at least a couple of them, liked the proposition coming from Elrond, like 500 years worth of all kinds of amazing things that they could use.
Like,
in
we're gonna clear out your mountain. Like, we're gonna furnish it. We're gonna feed you.
For 500 years, like that's not nothing. That's actually a pretty good deal if they live up to the deal. So I don't know if they're going to introduce an idea of a son being able to challenge his father, some sort of dwarvish right, or if it's a coup or something darker. I don't know, but I just have this feeling that that's where we're leading to, because we do know that Durin IV becomes king of Khazad-dûm, and he might, you know, try to fast track that given this big setback of his. Again, partially because of his own ambition and wanting to move mountains and live up to this premonition of what he could be, and with Disa right at his side saying, we have to come into our own on this, but also, he talks about having failed Elrond, and that's another thing, that's another through line, very much people talking about their failures and the consequences and blame and regret. That's a through line through so many of these stories. And I think that failure, like you said at the top, the other quote, Star Wars, it's like that will teach you more than always having success. So this setback is probably just going to put him in a stronger place to potentially take over. And I feel like that is a very good season finale coming to a head plot point.
It feels right for the closing of a chapter. And Nicky, one of my favorite little moments in Lord of the Rings, but specifically when you quote it, because it's always funny, the whole mine. My father was mine. Like, we know what becomes of this.
Yeah.
And it's that interesting thing that we go through as fans of so many of these properties, Star Wars included. House of the Dragon. I don't know if you've heard, we do that here on Casterly Talk, and that is also a prequel. And so it's like you can have these, we know that the bigger failure is coming, but it doesn't invalidate or alter or make unworthy the trials and tribulations and victories along the way. And the same, like, it's the whole, like, does Darth Vader matter if there was still darkness after Return of the Jedi? Like, that whole stuff. So we know this is going to still end in whatever tragedy it is. But so, Nicky, my question to you before we wrap this dwarven section is, what is your perspective, and what do you think is the perspective of sort of audience members when we're engaging with something that we know the ending of? And does it make you feel any differently about these characters? Like, how do you think they're balancing that honesty?
I think just the way I always sort of look at things like this, with House of the Dragon as a sort of parallel example, because like we're watching the unraveling, right? Like it's not like how A New Hope begins, where it's already bad and they're gonna make it better, right? Like this is it's okay right now and it's just gonna get worse. So I think it's always like, I think we talked last time I was here about the hubris of these characters, and like that's something I fear with Durin IV, and if there's this upcoming challenge, and this whole thing of like the I'm right, I got this, and I'm gonna push forward, and it's gonna mess everything up. And so I think it's super important just to, in terms of engaging with stories that start in this way and make you, and where you have an idea already of where we're going. I always think it's funny because it's like people who are fans of the Peter Jackson trilogy and Hobbit movies, and maybe just don't know the other stuff, the vastness of the textual lore, where they're like, I don't know, like it's interesting, I'm just sort of like lost with Rings of Power, and I'm like, well, the ending. Like, if you watch the beginning of Fellowship, you know where we're going. And so like it's just one of those things where it's like with these kind of stories, you just have to, I think, revel in the tragedy, and just
somewhat,
and like just understand that we're watching things go wrong, and it's not about like invalidating things. It's not about every the Battle of Coruscant in Revenge of the Sith is still a win, and you still get excited by it. When they hit the landing and they're like, and everyone's like, woo.
And that's sort of what I knew, as I sort of just teed you up basically to just say what I was thinking, because you're the other half of my brain. But I love what you said there. Like, that idea, I just wanted to have on the record and have here, because, and Rachel, you can chime in too. And then I do want you to choose where we go, because I feel like there's a natural segue that is the same here. This idea that we show you the Balrog to say definitively, in case you didn't remember, in case you didn't realize what kingdom you were in, because that's possible too. There's a movie only fan watching this that is like, oh, it's that place because it looks so different, and they're not calling it Moria, and it's different things. So that, I think, do you find that effective, or do you find that to be perhaps maybe a card played maybe too soon?
this goes back to something I said on the very first episode that we came into this. I come into it knowing those things. I come into it not even just knowing the movies, but the books.
Yeah.
So there is a push and pull there. I might think that that's a little hitting us over the head or a little too early or whatnot. But I have to understand that not everybody is watching it with the level of knowledge that I am. And all things considered, it's a really cool shot. It's the foreshadowing. It's another example of showing flame and fire, which is very big throughout this whole episode. And it would make somebody who doesn't know so much about dwarvish lore or what Tolkien wrote, but the idea, if somebody sees that, they're probably going to say, oh, Durin III is probably right. You know, so it's their cue to get the same takeaway that we're getting, knowing what we know in terms of what dwarves are like, what drives them, how this is all going to go. So I get
to keep them sympathetic, to keep him sympathetic, which you have to do across, and they do that in every storyline here. Everyone that is the wrong one, except maybe Farazan, who we're gonna see you soon, buddy. We're gonna be back on those shores. You have to give the older generation or even people as silly as like Malva and the Harfoot storyline. They need something to be able to say the generational change over here is important, because even by the time we get to the events of like Fellowship of the Ring and stuff, that old young things looming over this current generation, it is so important. So Rachel, just so, because we could do a whole episode on Khazad-dûm, but because it's so good. Moving into the other storylines here, there's this thread that's in Khazad-dûm of our parent generation, of dealing with failure, et cetera, that is present in so many of these things. And especially in terms of the youth want to make a change. The youth are struggling with their place. And you see that with Theo, you see that with Nori. Where do you want to go next? Because we're going to hit them all, but just what jumps out next?
Yeah. I'd like to go to Theo, because that really ties into the Galadriel of this episode too. And we all know, Galadriel and my love for her. But in terms of bridging the Galadriel that they have established in the show and the Galadriel we know in Fellowship of the Ring, this episode goes a long way. And it makes me think of the idea that I think most people in real life too is better at giving advice than taking it for themselves. So you have Galadriel and Theo meeting up, and both of them blaming themselves for what has happened, and her giving him all of this incredibly sage and hopeful and profound advice that I'm watching the entire time going, she's talking to herself too. Like all of like don't hold bad deeds as good, because that will eat away at your heart. And it just makes me think of like how last week she almost let that happen to her. And so it's really calling to all of the things that she's been going through. And then it puts a spotlight on Theo, like, as you said, as a next generation. We'll make a soldier of you yet, because she's giving him, these ideas to keep in mind, because there's more fight to come. That is very clearly going to happen. And he is going to have to continue to step up, as he already has. But don't step up and put this burden on your shoulder, because you might not be able to get rid of it. Again, speaking about herself,
the tempest in me.
Yes.
I cannot stop.
I don't know what I am without a sword. Like,
yes, like I love what you said about bridging it, because you're so right. Like there's been all kinds of opinions across the entire space, and we've had many opinions here. It's been a complicated thing to see her so starkly different. And then her whole forward momentum has quite literally blown up in everyone's faces. Elendil blames her. Doesn't say it to her, but blames her right before she shows up. And it's this idea of almost an ironic softening, that when suddenly the quest did come, at least this chapter, to its conclusion, she finally almost has like more human moments. Suddenly she's referencing childhood. She's referencing her husband. She's referencing the old times. She's referencing all of this stuff that she's learned along the way. And it's almost like she's looking around at all this fire. And you said fire being a theme and being a motif across them all. That sort of idea of how it destroys, but also resets. is a very interesting thing there. So Nicky, we're gonna come back to the husband thing. We're gonna save that. And that's the second I saw that, I was like sitting there with my whatever I was eating, like, oh my god, I gotta ask Rachel.
I'm like where is Kelleborn? I would much like to speak with him.
I would much like to see you in season 2, which I think they even outright said the other day in Variety, I want to say, that he's in case you were wondering. But Nicky, what did you take from these reactions? Because I think that the actor has been doing a wonderful job, but as a written character, I think that Theo is like my most improved, and I was an unexpected duo that I didn't expect to love as much as I did.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, because I remember talking with you in the earlier episodes and being like, man, someone needs to just give Theo a little smack here. Like, stop messing around with the wrong people. Stop messing around with that weird sword that has flames coming out of its hilt. Yeah. And yeah, it's like I think he needed this kind of thing, and I would not have ever guessed he would have gotten it with Galadriel, which is again just one of the great moments in any show that has a massive cast, is when you start pairing people that you wouldn't think would like match, and oftentimes they don't, but then they sort of find each other again, and I think Theo needed a new line of perspective, and I think Galadriel also, she's obviously been through a lot, but to say the least, but the eruption of what we now or later call Mount Doom, colloquially, was a massive L. Like, it just was. I mean, like, she was, I think it was a massive humbling experience to her, and gave her, like the self-awareness now, where it's like, I remember when she was saying all those lines about the not letting bad deeds, like not forgetting that. And I was like, is she gonna like acknowledge herself in this? And I think she did. I don't remember the exact like line, but it's like she did nail it in the end. Like, so I was like, are you understand you're talking about yourself?
Even Theo has these moments of like
right.
This is a lot,
which she did in the end, and I thought that was a good moment of like a way for her to process what has happened, and to not process it unhealthily as she has other things, because it's like, because it was a massive defeat, and the way it seems she's handled it now is sort of a refocusing, some introspection, some thinking about the good times.
I have to wonder, like, there are dialogue parallels with Peter Jackson's films. There are visual references to Peter Jackson's films. This handing of the blade to Theo, is this I interpret it as a reverse sort of like, I'm not giving you a sword like Aragorn receives. You're putting aside, it's almost put aside the commander, become the Lady of Lorien you were born to be, which we're still obviously far off from. But does anyone else, Rachel, did you pick up on some, like, someone else will be the soldier now?
The idea being that she has to be more than that. And that we know she becomes more than that. And that there are other ways to fight. There are other ways to focus your attention. And she has been so, like we said earlier, like, what am I without a sword in my hand? Yeah. Now maybe she's at a place where she's ready to see. I've no doubt she's picking up the sword again, and there's a lot more fight in her. But now she's at least contemplating the idea that there is more beyond that. And again, generationally speaking, it's hard amongst the elves, immortal and all that, but to see a young man who we heard Arondir talk to and say, you found more bravery in 14 years than I have in centuries. So like, these elves looking at these people and seeing things from a different perspective because they aren't immortal. And I love how that sort of all ties into her evolution. And because I do take notes, I do have the quote, and I just have to say it because it's really good.
No, please.
So Galadriel says to Theo, it darkens the heart to call dark deeds good. It gives place for evil to thrive inside us. Every war is fought both without and within. Of that, every soldier must be mindful. Even I. Even you. So she's saying all this stuff to him, and as a viewer, you're like, excuse you, you've been dancing around this real closely the last few episodes. And then she makes the acknowledgement, even I. So it seems like Theo was actually the perfect partner for that to come out for her. Because she's realizing that passing down her anger and her revenge and it's, the sword is the only way is actually going to endanger somebody like him.
Endanger other people, losses that were not explicitly shown, but we know who is believed to be gone. We'll talk about Isildur and everything that happened there. We've seen the consequences with Miriel and the loss of her sight, but also in a very mythic way, you lose your sight, but you gain your sight. You lose your sight, but you gain perspective.
And I mean, the episode's called The Eye.
And it's called The Eye.
We start on Galadriel's eye at the very beginning in what is an incredible shot.
That's gorgeous.
The cinematography really playing up with the reds and the ash and everything. And the symbolism, the horse riding by with the fire on it. I really thought the direction in this episode was incredibly well done.
Yeah.
But just the idea of seeing. And that also ties into, again, if we want to keep talking about Galadriel and Theo, he's like, how do you let go of the burden? And she says, you have to trust that there are other powers greater than the power of darkness and that they have a design. And he's like, well, if their design means I lose my home, and at that point he probably thinks his mother is dead and my family, like, how can I believe in that without seeing that? And she still hasn't found a way, but I know that that's what she's working for.
This is Theo's Christmas movie. This is his moment of seeing and believing. It's a theme for a reason, right? Like this, like Nicky, to throw it over to you, and we can all talk about this. Like Galadriel's in her largest pop culture presence, of course, in the Cate Blanchett iteration that informs, no doubt, these creators and these writers and these scripts. This idea of her as not being the initial, she doesn't have Gandalf's role of being the initial call to action. Let me bring you through the threshold, but being sort of this like shepherd of heroes who does the gift giving at that key moment for the Fellowship, and sort of does that here for Theo. That is looking at this literally smaller, sort of shaggy-haired young man and sort of doing the guidance and talking about this test, knowing these emotional tests, knowing what her real test will eventually be. Talk to me a little bit about how you feel about her sort of stepping into that mentor role as you were watching these, because it's an interesting one that she didn't really have with her company, because they had lost respect for her, and Halbrand and her are too much like peers to have it in the same way. It was an interesting change.
Yeah, and I think part of it goes back to sort of what you were hinting, and to introduce this whole part is is she sort of learning how to spread responsibility, right? Because I think part of it is, I don't remember if they said how many years it's been since Sauron's been gone and Finrod's been dead, but she was very much on her own in a time of peace, right? Sort of driven, her her own drive is going, I gotta go check this place. I gotta check this place. We're gonna go as north as we can go, and all that. And now I think she's sort of realizing this. It's here now. The sort of the darkness that she felt was coming. It's back, and I think she sees this as a more firmly as ever. This is a war, a fight we're not escaping, because the evidence is here. They've created their land now. They can move in daylight, and they're going to be a threat in this area, and it's just going to grow and fester. And I think it has to be, some sort of acknowledgement on her part that she can't just lead this one elf crusade on darkness, and this is going to be so much bigger that she has to either whether she does it intentionally or not, she's going to have to learn to trust the people around her and empower them to also fight with her, because maybe that's an issue with her company at the beginning, right? She was so one track minded that she was leaving them behind, literally up the mountainside. And now it's this thing of I need to foster these people, and bring them with me. And it's pretty soon I'm not going to have people telling me I was wrong. Like,
Absolutely.
pretty soon we're all gonna be in this.
And in this destruction, she finds this resolve where she takes Muriel's vow as a certainty. And it's not a question for her, as she has, in their darkest hour, as everybody has faced here, we talked about Durin's darkest hour, and the darkest hour of this plot line, it's, no, I believe in them more now, because I've even seen now what they're able to tap into. And, you know, Rachel, we'll start with you on the other half of the Mordor plot, which, by the way, we can call it the Mordor plot now. It's no longer the Southland storyline. Shout out to Joseph Mall, our cold hands, for having a button on the episode of like, welcome to hell. Like, I won. He's the only one that didn't face failure in this episode. He faced rousing success. But Rachel, bringing us into our Númenóreans and Southlanders, this idea of some of them have lost, some of them only believe that they have lost, unless you are Beric, who does not believe. And let me tell you, I don't think I've cried at an animal scene in years. I welled up when he let that horse go. I could, one beautiful shot of a horse going up a hill I was
getting Hidalgo flashbacks.
All I could think about was Aragorn and Brago, and I was like, "Oh, I love this! I love this tie." Because at this point, things are, you know, right out there. Isildur is not dead, and I have very large suspicions that Beric is going to help in his rescue or find him or whatever, and I'm here for all of it, for sure. But what we were talking about is how, you know, this was a big L for the good guys. But out of that comes everybody reacts to that. And it's how you react to the losses. It's how you react to the failures that matters, because you can't change the past. And all of these characters know that. And you can even say this about the Harfoots too. And I know we'll talk about it, but the same through line is there. You can sit and say, this was all my fault, and wallow and regret and everything else. Or you can take stock, you can move forward with a new sense of urgency, with a new sense of commitment. And it was very stark and very well done to have Miriel and Elendil react in exact opposite ways. And I thought that was really, really well done. And also very surprising to all of us who know the story. Elendil is supposed to be staunch, faithful. But we're now giving him this wrinkle of thinking that his son is dead, which could change his perspective. And if we go back to Númenor, where half the population wants to go back to the old ways with the elves and the other half does not, and we've clearly seen Arianne, his daughter, on the other side, whereas Isildur was. So where does Elendil go with this? And I think that's a great setup, a great obstacle to give that character. Meanwhile, you have Miriel, who is now more committed than ever to coming to Middle Earth. And what I find so fascinating about that is, again, sometimes I don't want to give away a ton of stuff that I know happens, that is coming. Like, I know we all know the big markers, but I don't want to say too much. But in terms of her relationship with Pharazôn, just got more interesting to me, like looking forward to it. And the fact that she invokes her father's name, not the Elvish version, but the they call them the Kingsmen version.
Oh, the Tar version.
Yeah. Instead of Tar, Palantir, which is his Elvish name, she calls him Ar Inzilidor, so that's Pharazôn is an Ar Pharazôn. She's a Tar Miriel. So those are the two camps. And the fact that she invokes her father's name using the other side, the other camp's naming ways, just spoke to me that, like, they all want, we even know that Pharazôn was actually not against them going to Middle Earth. He's against them allying with the elves. But he is all about spreading Númenórean power.
And so far, it's been a win for him. I mean, they did install Halbrand, which is what his point A was.
Yep. And they did, while they lost the Southlands, the actual location, they saved a big group of the people. And that was a win for themselves, because now they have a group of people. And I found it very fascinating that they're going to Pelargir. which is on the ocean. It's the mouth of the Anduin River. And for people who watch The Lord of the Rings, that's where Aragorn and the army of the dead go and take out all the Corsairs, which is Peter Jackson's cameo in Return of the King. And then they take the boats up the Anduin. So some people might actually recognize that name, and it is a location that we have technically seen in the movies. But that just means that these people are essentially going to become Gondorians to some extent, like not Numenorians who became Gondorians, but other races that sort of mixed in with that, which I thought that was a really interesting way to go about it. But it does give me hope for their future as a people.
And an interesting note that you are under the impression, the episode is so compelling that you lose yourself in each storyline. I had forgotten that I hadn't checked in with Halbrand, and then we saw that he was gravely injured, needs elvish medicine, and there was no Liv Tyler, unfortunately, to show up and speak Elvish. But
no, but now it's an excuse to bring him to Linden, and let me tell you,
exactly,
that's another point in the Sauron column.
he's not. I thought, it's maybe but he's going to be a king and settle his people. And then I was like, wait, you're not going to be with your people? What storyline are you going to? Oh no, you're going over here. You're going to
How are we going to get him up to Eregion? Well, here's a way.
Yeah.
Also, what happened to him?
Yeah.
They didn't find him earlier. They just found him on the side of the road, and he doesn't look burned. He looks like he was stabbed.
He looks like he was stabbed.
Why'd they leave him still alive? Yep. There are a lot of big questions.
Those are this is the most TV in a good way. The most TV moment here was you're in bad shape. You seem okay. I love the moment of we find ourselves on another raft and sort of that alliance that's happened here. Nicky, you and I have joked off air a lot about the Sauron of it all and how it's starting to come into who is Ray territory between 2015 and 2017 to the point of okay, all right, we get this is clearly, if it is or not, it's clearly they are having so much fun jerking us around in different directions. So Nicky, my question for you is, how long while he's on the healing table until Kelleborn comes and pitches him, does his elevator pitch? I'm kidding. That's not the question. Because
they're like wheeling him in, and Kelleborn trying to catch up.
Kelleborn is like, you said he was a smith. Nicky, how did you feel sort of about the way that we sort of tied the storyline together? Because we are also need to talk about Arondir and Bronwyn. We had that reunion, which was, man, I tell you, that stepson hug.
That is right below Durin and Elrond.
That was the other one for me.
In terms of emotion for me.
So beautiful. And Bear McCreary, you're my enemy now for that musical fake out, for that random corpse. Yeah. I believe they had me. I didn't think they'd fake me out on her twice in 2 different episodes, and they did. So Nicky, tell me about this reunion and how we wrapped the story of men in this episode.
Yeah, I think, first of all, in terms of a little eye to the future, I was really excited to hear about the Pelargir stuff, because I'm really excited to see, just from a design standpoint for the show, how they build that out, because it becomes quite prosperous and this sort of first port of entry into the kingdom and stuff, and so it's that alone just. Because Rings of Power, when they can hit you with an establishing shot of a location, they're gonna go all the way, and I feel like we can get some pretty cool ones later down the line. But yeah, I think keeping so much focused on Theo, Bronwyn, and Arondir, it's that hug just solidified everything we've seen for 7 episodes, and even just going back to at the beginning, Theo is like, "What's that elf guy doing here?" And now they're
come a long way.
And now it's oh my God, thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping my mom safe. Thank you for being safe yourself. It's just this moment of we can be okay.
The show's been a great you've misjudged the elves sort of season, and they've done their fair share of misjudging, no doubt. But every storyline, except for the Harfoots, has this moment of actually, elves are great. It's just about conversations, which is kind of about having them, about listening, and it goes both ways. Arondir realizing, there was that great point that Alex Damon brought up in our Udun review, that it's Arondir destroys the tower that represented oppression, it wasn't. I had connected that, and it's still kind of this, I think, of like he's willing to break with elven tradition, the cutting of the tree and everything, but really on the bigger level of I am no longer a watchman. I am no longer a cop for this area. Like I'm in here with you. I'm in this tent. I'm not leaving either. I wondered for a second if Galadriel would say we're going to Linden or are you coming? And no, it's like I'm here, and we're gonna have the Theo Jr. half elven very soon. I wouldn't be surprised if this was just a family that we stuck with for the rest of the show, and I would be absolutely in love with that.
And there is actually precedent. Like so Pelargir is not far from Dol Amroth, which is another Gondorian on the ocean, one of their major cities. And the legends basically say that like when you meet somebody from Dol Amroth, they look like they have elvish blood in them because there were elves that, lived on those shores, and they worked very closely together for a long time. And while, the stories basically say there weren't very many unions between the two, we know the big ones in the Silmarillion, but there was probably more than that, and not, didn't make it into the songs, didn't make it into the stories, but that the blood shows through generations and generations later. So I had immediately went to that, and I was like, that's probably me just hoping beyond all hope that they make it through the whole series, which
cut to season 5, the song of Arondir and Bronwyn, and the founders of the I would. That's the kind of, hey, there's a line about this in the Legendarium that's not fleshed out. Do it. Like we could get in there. Like that's really exciting to me. Nikki, you were having a question.
No, that'd be cool. I always love a Dol Amroth mention. they're very classy. Very classy over there. Is it Imrahil? Is that the
Imrahil? Yes.
Yeah. It's I think that's an exciting thing. Again, just from the mention of where they're going, it's like because Gondor is so homogenized in the movies. I love this idea that we might get a little bit of this, like, all the little vassal states and stuff like that forming. But I forgot where the original point was.
No,
I guess in terms of
that was so exciting that I was like, you're right. Like that's so cool.
Yeah, I think with Bronwyn and the trio, I think that's the magic of having characters that you've just created for the show. They can do anything. They can be wherever you want them to be. So I think we're with them for the long haul. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that stuff. And before we have any forward movement into the grove and the apples and everything that happens in our final big storyline, are there any other ideas that jumped out to you all here, thematically, character-wise, that really stuck with you in terms of anybody that was going down here? I know Elendil's got to go pick up Narsil, so like that's sad, but it's also hype. I wanted him back on that island to pick it up in some way.
I remember early on being like, oh, their soft friend is not gonna make it. he's gonna
Elendil. One of them was not going to make it out of that.
Well, he did the mortal sin of all police dramas of saying that he was gonna retire. And he had his girlfriend, fiance, wife, whatever her role was, on Numenor during the partying before. So that's two sins, Antimo, that will get you killed in these types of stories.
Nice one.
And we know Valandil's a goner at some point too, but it'll be in some sort of saving Isildur way. And maybe he's leading a son being named after him.
Is he leading the garrison that stays? Perhaps. We haven't gotten an exact layout.
We've not gotten visual confirmation about which
who's there. So that we know that they're gone by the end. They're sailing. There is one just like hilarious mental image I have that hopefully we get in the finale of what I called the surprise mother effer, which is Galadriel and Gil-galad seeing each other for the first time since he thought he got rid of her. Right. Unless he has some sort of, I don't know, Rachel, you could tell me. Is there a magical way that he would know that she didn't cross or that she's back?
Not that I'm aware of. And I do get the sense that there hasn't been a lot of opportunity for sending messengers to. But I mean, I don't know how here we go with like the Game of Thrones illusions. I do not know how long it's going to take her and Halbrand to get to Linden. My guess is we're probably just going to kind of jump there to have all of the information finally shared amongst everybody, because she also needs to learn about the fading that is happening. And they're all essentially going to put 2 and 2 together, that it's the coming of Sauron, the destruction of the Southlands, the fading. And I think that's what's going to spur Celebrimbor to, work a little harder, because he wants to create something that could perhaps help them or stem that tide, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So
this is what he wanted. Beyond petty
ultimately he kind of really did.
You wanted a chance to make an impact that mattered, and you wanted significance. And there's the lesson here as well, or an anti-lesson. There's a theme of people potentially learning the wrong lessons here, where the last time Gil-galad had any effect on that storyline was calling back the Rangers and calling back the Watchmen, and the Watch Warden. He's like, we got a letter from the High King, it's time to leave. And then all this happens. That could almost reinforce Gil-galad in the wrong way of like, I knew we should have watched him. I was right. Look what happens. Some man facilitated this that we're keeping an eye on. I knew that they had this in them. So there's potential there for even more clashing. And then, maybe Gil-galad and maybe Halbrand just punches Gil-galad in the face. Who knows what happens? Those are not characters that I think are going to be pals when we get to that storyline. But I have of us. Oh, go ahead. Last point, and then I just want
to
say, this is a short one, just because I didn't mention him. As someone whose team I don't want anyone we've seen so far to be Sauron. it's impossisituation to not just always draw attention to how sus Halbrand is. like it's just like, man, because I remember we talked a lot about how we felt about him in particular being Sauron.
Yeah.
And just like, it was just like, and here's another card, and here's another card. And I was like, oh no. what's
they could all not be there.
I know, it's
brilliance of the way they're doing it. There are plenty of other explanations that will totally work. But at this point, they have to know we're all going,
they just
hello, like you're giving us every reason in the book to think that that's what this is. And this was a real big one. The fact that he's going back with her, I was just like, this is, but I'm enjoying it. They seem to be having so much fun with it, and I'm having.
But then it's like, and they could go full TV, have Celebrimbor bring him into the forge, and be like, by the way, Halbrand, this is my apprentice Anatar. Season ends.
Ends.
And Alden, as I've said,
the most beautiful actor ever cast.
As I said to you, I blame Brian Cogman. That man spent too much time in Thrones to be so innocent. He's messing with us.
Yep, absolutely messing with us. And then that storyline must, of course, connect with our 3 wizard, sorcerer, mages, whatever's going on there in the Harfoot storyline. Once again, the greatest teacher failure is once again finding the gray. There's a destructive, dangerous, scary moment, but it also did work for the stranger. He did resurrect the trees of the grove. The Harfoots did make a change, and finally, the nomadic ancestors of the people that must settle literally can no longer be nomadic and are going on an adventure, unless they just rebuild all those cards, which Largo seems to be like, hey, we keep moving. That trailer line of hearts bigger than our feet, I was like, my god, the dad stuff. Gotta go watch the Guardians too.
It's so good because Nori is on the brink of regretting it all. She even says it to her mother, like, I should never have fallen that star. I'm just a Harfoot. I'm not special. But that's not true, because the Harfoots are special just in a very different way. And that was always the story of the hobbits. They aren't great fighters. They aren't, great leaders. They aren't the big focus and heroes and stories. And yet what makes them good and what makes them important is their outlook on life and their outlook on being there for each other. And the way that whole scene comes together, I mean, it's basically like, you're not going without me, could just like redone in the Harfoot way, but it's so
good.
It was great. It was
and also just an unexpected choosing too of who would be in the party. Like Sadok makes sense, probably makes sense. But for Marigold, I believe is her mother.
Yes, that's her mother's name.
For her to jump in, being the one that had cautioned against it, is so much more thematically poignant than if it was Largo, which would have been still nice and easy. But for her to make that choice. So this storyline, like the stranger does leave. He's heading toward a nearby settlement of men.
He's headed towards Greenwood the Great. AKA what becomes Mirkwood.
Oh,
so now the theories are much stronger in the
Oh.
Radagast courts.
That isn't it, man. He's
He loves nature.
We're gonna
Loves
catch
that
the
nature.
stranger next episode with a pipe. Hey, I like
Hey,
it here.
The
Burn
fact
hoop.
that he heals the tree and the fact
Yeah.
that he scared away the
Yeah.
wolves do speak to Radagast's particular
Yeah.
traits as a
Yes,
wizard.
that is
And to
so
be heading to
true.
Greenwood the Great, I was like, wow, okay, point in that corner.
Yeah, I love that.
That's why they're never gonna catch him because he's got his rabbit sleigh already.
I know the rabbit was noble. Come on.
I look those movies. We could do a whole podcast on that. Maybe we will at some point do some rewatches. But I cheer for the rabbits every time. I love them. They're
so
charming.
good.
They're great.
It's fascinating.
The moment though that I think was probably the most like holy ass moment that I've had in this show was that trailer shot of blowing the embers. Seemed very chill, and I thought they were going to track him with the magic of the, and then all of a sudden an entire society is changed and they have destroyed. I was in shock. I did not, and it was pure sadness.
It was just in case you were thinking they might be good guys. Like they maybe.
They didn't just attack her. They're standing behind her.
Nope,
no,
nope.
it was, and Largo standing up to them was big. Nikki, what were your first impressions of this whole storyline? Because it is, again, it's a rock bottom, but finding a new resolve that we have seen across everything. But these were our innocents. These are not connected to the big conflict until the big conflict shows up and makes them connected.
I first of all, I just want to say, for as many orcs and flaming demon looking things the show has, like this to me was like the first time I was scared watching. Like this was like actually scary. And we had like the orc creeping around the barn and house and stuff way back, but these people are really like unsettling. And there's obviously because there's so much like supernatural element to them. And almost like to bring up Macbeth again, it's almost like these three weird sisters, right? Like coming around, and they can appear in different places, and yeah, I think it was just like it was such a like unsettling moment. And again, to put it on the Harfoots, who are the most sort of wholesome and ill-equipped, maybe even in terms of physicality and weaponry, like in terms of like just defending themselves simply, like to put them up against this power that, I mean, to my knowledge, like I wouldn't even know where to place like these in my understanding of like like Middle Earth and everything. Like I don't.
Is this like the wizard initiation party?
Yeah, like
they just happen to suck. Like,
yeah, and like I think like my thing with like the whole stranger storyline is like I'm not making predictions. Like, it's just like I'll just see what they got, because
it's been way more amorphous than the Sauron conversation.
Yeah,
like in the Hallbrand side for sure. Yeah. More points and more columns, I would say.
Yeah, and so it's like, I think it was just such an unsettling scene, and to have to make it this part where we've seen how the Harfoots camouflage themselves when. I mean, the two guys with like the big antler things on their backs, like they all shut down their little village and they all like hid. And the one time one Harfoot breaks the camouflage and is like, "Hey," they get their whole world wrecked.
And it plays into the ideas of grayness that Miriel speaks to, and I think it's sometimes, and it's not wrong, but it's easy to say like House of the Dragon and Martin's world. Gray. This world, there is good and evil, and that is largely true. Broad strokes, good and evil are more defined here. But Rachel, to throw it to you thematically here, these mistakes, this innocent girl causing the destruction in a roundabout way of her community, which they sort of feared. So that's again, like Galadriel, more fears coming to pass. But thankfully they did not blame her like I thought they would. But then also the idea that it is horrific when he's bringing the tree back to life, and it is dangerous, and people do almost get hurt by those branches and everything. But then it worked. And then it was still beautiful. What do you think that is trying to tell us?
I think it ties into the idea of the eye and seeing and not always being able to see what you need to see in anything, that, not everything is always instantaneous. And the people talking about premonitions and talking about, the higher power is invoked. Durin III talks about it. Galadriel talks about it. And they are much more far-seeing than we are. And it ties into like, so do we just sit around because it's all been predetermined, or do we have a say in our own destinies and the things that we do and the reactions we have and the choices we make? So I really thought that it tied all into that really, really well. And that the stranger is essentially still learning. It's like a child. He's this giant amongst the smallest characters in this story, but he's the one that knows the least and understands the least and has a good heart. Like, that has been clearly established, and it's not for a wanting to help them. It's just not necessarily understanding or being able to see exactly how he can or how long it will take to do that and whatnot. And so you have these knee-jerk reactions, and then they turn out to be wrong. So in fact, Nori was the one who could see the clearest about what he was and who he was and what his heart was. So I thought that was all really, really well done. But also doing the plot thing. You got to move him on, and so that you can move on the mystics to come through to keep chasing him. And a lot of people are using the mystics as the reason why the stranger is Sauron. Why would they be chasing him otherwise? But I think it's more a case of they think he might be, rather than definitely is, because we've heard several different people talk about the legends of the falling star and it meaning something. And the Harfoots have talked about it, and Waldrick talked about it. So it's more of some people think he is something, but we might find out that it's something completely different.
Right.
Only time's going to tell. But I do think that the mystics they're the dweller, the ascetic, and the nomad are what they're billed as.
Nice.
And they are, like you were saying, the hardest to tie to what Tolkien has written. They really don't fit anything exactly. They could be Maya and just others that were never mentioned in the books. That would help describe or explain why they have some powers. And I kind of am leaning more towards the theory that they were just followers of Morgoth, who he taught how to use the dark arts that Sauron was trying to learn in his castle up in the Ford with.
Yeah.
They learned at the feet of the master, so they have attained some dark power.
And are they acting out of fear because of that, right? Like, if we were Morgoth followers and all of a sudden the Valar sent someone down, a protector, we got to kill him before he knows what he is.
Right. So there's a lot of ways that could go, which again just speaks to the writers saying, yeah, we're not giving any of this to you easily. Like either way works with the story that they have told so far. But I do like, it's very interesting that the mystics are one of the least, they're not the easy thing to figure out for us lore nerds who are just like turning every page and going, could that be this? Could this be tied to that? Like even the Kelleborn stuff, which I suppose we'll wrap up with, my head went to a completely different idea because of some precedent that was set in the books and whatnot. But that's also the fun of it. We've not seen these characters before. We're finally getting a more sense. We just haven't heard them say a word, right? Have they said anything?
No, I don't think so. I don't even think they even say anything before they blow.
They definitely didn't in this episode. And I can't remember if they did in episode 5 when they find the crater. But
there's just always a very ominous chanting in the score.
The music,
yes, the music certainly is just doing a lot of talking for them.
Right.
But they are clearly powerful. They're clearly at this time, we now know that they're antagonistic. And their goals do not seem to be in line with the goals of the good guys. So,
and I love that the good guys, including the Harfoots, finally, like, they're not intimately tied to the conflict. The conflict has found them, whatever it is. But there is, at least, as Sadak points out, in their own mythology, they're aware of. Are they aware of volcanoes, just period, or are they aware
of the legends say there are fire mountains?
Yeah,
and then he ties it into and it's a sign of evil rising.
Yes,
You
it's
know,
like
which
the
is
earliest Harfoots. Did they?
Yep.
Because it's, they're condensing and they're playing with things. So maybe the Sadoc's ancestors knew about big men that fell in with something bad and things like that. So,
Also,
Nikki, what are your just gonna throw it to you. What are your last thoughts on this storyline here?
I first and foremostly, because we are in large parts driven by spite. I want to just collectively deliver the L to the people who are being snotty online, saying, "Why does Sauron look like Eminem?"
Yeah.
And it's like,
oh Lord,
you didn't know what the hell you were talking about then, and you clearly
still don't.
You clearly don't now.
This is also a non-binary performer, I believe, who is very clearly, if I'm presenting, when you actually look at the screen instead of just memeing.
Yeah, and it's like, so like, you know what? People were annoying then. I'm glad the show has told them to stop talking.
Yes.
and just relax. But yeah, I think it's like I was saying earlier, like this was an unsettling part, and I'm just really just continually intrigued by where this is gonna go. I think the sort of hints towards a wizard is like super fun. Obviously, it's such a key piece of this world. It's like not having a lightsaber in Star Wars forever, and then a lightsaber, someone finds a lightsaber, it's like, it's like it's so cool to just sort of like imagine that entering the world. And then I'm really excited about the team up. I think it's so many good feelings about what these people represent, and like it was like getting Sam like 3 times, right? Like you're not, it's cool to see how again, like with Theo and Galadriel, character pairings, and you're going to take them away from the society and now forge these 4 people really tightly into each other.
And Poppy, I think, Poppy specifically saying we've left enough people behind after knowing that all of Poppy's family died and that they're in their traditions. We wait for you. Similarly to this dwarf and this elf calling each other brothers, she has now deemed the stranger family. She has made. She was the one that had that emotional breakthrough of we've left enough people behind. The Samwise role, but then, like you said, tripled and quadrupled down the fact that Sadoc wants to go as well. It's that visual parallel to the 4 hobbits, but it's also just this idea of Nori being validated even in failure in the same way that Galadriel is, in the same way that Durin has been. Yeah, Nori, it did work out that way, but look at what your community learned that then made, because if they didn't learn these lessons, they would have blown up on you and de-wheeled you, and it would have been your fault. But in failure, you find out, yes, you are special. Yes, they did learn. They do care. They've acknowledged what good he's given despite the scary moments with the wolves, with the trees now. And this idea that Nori has fulfilled, I think, her potential, at least up to this point. Of course, she has a longer journey to go. But in the tradition of Frodo and Bilbo as being like the main halfling of a Tolkien story, she's found, I think, familiar ground, but also new ground. I think her motivation for being on an adventure is obviously very different than Bilbo's, who's more forced out the door, as Gandalf will tell you. But the idea of like her fulfilling that classic theme of like who are the halflings emotionally and mentally, what makes them different, and how she has a greater resolve even in failure than, at least for the episode parallels. Like it's Elendil, the captain, that we see cry. It's Nori, the halfling, that we see charge on. And I think that is so important for this. And I said this on the show before, there's a reason why when you play Lord of the Rings online that the hobbits have a resistance to dread. Like that is a stat that you are given. It's an advantage. You are able to walk near things without being affected that other players can't, and that is just so present here and everything. So let's end here on the Husband Watch 2022.
You need a graphic now for it.
I know. I keep making Kornacki jokes whenever I talk about like regions and stuff, but I feel like I need a Bachelor graphic of just Kelleborn with a rose. So Rachel, this was pretty big. Lots of comments throughout the season about Is Adar connected to Kelleborn? Is Adar this? Is Adar that? Is Kelleborn dead? Is it a rights issue? Now, it's not. He's coming. He's out there, but they haven't seen each other since he left, which has been a long time.
Oh, like well over 1,000 years, I think closer to 2.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, all the speculation and stuff, I figured they were just changing the timeline as to when she met him and just would have written that into the show. But this was a twist I did not see coming. But it was written clearly in a way that it was the last time she saw him. So it's more probably an assumption that he's dead. Rather than he actually is. Because again, there's certain things that can't go against, and the fact remains Kelleborn is in the Lord of the Rings. So they have to figure a way around that. The slightly less obvious but lore head way that it could go is that there is one character in Tolkien mythology who is born again. An elf dies in the fall of Gondolin. His name is Glorfindel.
Oh, hell yeah. You were talking about him last night, Rachel.
Oh my God.
Will they do it?
Will they do
it,
they
cowards.
put Kelleborn in the Glorfindel mold? It doesn't work completely because Kelleborn is a cinder, an elf of Doriath, not an older. But I think that they could probably work their way around that pretty easily. But because there has been one instance of an elf that died in Middle-earth, was reborn in Aman, and actually came back to Middle-earth, means that is something I believe they could do. In this,
combine them into, or at least functionally give him that.
Could you just make the function be?
That's interesting. Yeah, I've also seen
that's the other. I've
seen speculation that he might have already founded or is founding the settlement in Lorien. Do you think that that's possible, or is that off?
I mean, it would be playing with chronology on a big scale because they found it based on events that haven't happened yet. However, certainly plausible.
But
if you're looking for reasons for him to still be in Middle-earth, having not died during the War of Wrath, but has not been seen by Galadriel, means you have to put him somewhere that she would never cross paths with him. And I don't know, give him amnesia or something, because it would be a little weird that he wouldn't try to come and find her. But these are all possibilities, and therefore, I'll be really curious to see what all of the writers, what they decide on to do that. But even more than the revelation, it was her talking about how they met.
Yes.
Beautiful. And just like, it is the most vulnerable and personable you've ever seen her. To
talking
have
about dancing.
So pure about, and the way that Theo reacts is how the audience reacts. Is like, you dancing? Like, that just goes to tell you that, again, she's lived for thousands upon thousands of years. So, and not all of them were during the War of Wrath. So there are other memories, there are other pieces to her character that she has probably subsumed under all this revenge and need to carry the sword and everything else. But they're still there. And I just love that image, because it's also the story of Beren and Luthien. He came upon Luthien dancing in a glade, and that's how he fell in love with her. And they're the ultimate man and elf relationship from the First Age. And then the silver clam comment, just it's all so personable and personal that it just shows an entire other side.
Into that theme that we talked about of fire resets. It burns everything down, but it resets. When you've burned the commander of the Northern armies and her entire quest, what's left is this woman that had this life, and suddenly she's like, oh wait, I'm, like we talked about, I need to be more, but I also was already more. I was a sister, I was a wife, I was a dancer, I was all these things that I didn't think that I could be anymore, which is a really exciting thing. Quick note before we close on your last thoughts, Nicky, about Glorfindel. Look, I'm no lore expert. I'm far away from the rank of lore master, but I remember as a kid loving Fellowship and my uncle telling me, there's a character in the books that was so powerful. And of course, you're explaining this to me like a 5-year-old at the time. He's like, he was so powerful that he couldn't even be on the team because he just radiated so much power. It's like, in my, I'm a Dragon Ball Z kid too. So I was like, wow, like, who is this guy? Like, so I've always had a childhood fascination with Glorfindel just being so rad that he is like so thunderous that he would have given away the secrecy just by existing. Is incredible to me. So if they want to put Jeff Bezos money into just making Glorfindel the greatest thing that's ever been on TV ever, or giving Kelleborn some of those traits, I will not be mad at it. So, Nicky, last thoughts before we wrap up here.
Yeah, I think in terms of the episode, like
in terms of Kelleborn thing, and then we'll wrap and we'll do.
Kelleborn, yeah. I think I was just surprised to hear his name. Like I don't have any like insight that Rachel didn't already give, but like I was just like, wow, okay, because I had assumed that maybe they would meet and like it would be but no, it sort of feeds into her in the way sort of Finrod's death does. It sort of feeds into that isolation of Galadriel, I think, and the way that she thinks, like she just looks at everything. I lost my brother, lost my husband, I lost, now my best friend betrayed me, tried to send me off, kind of thing. Like it just sort of now feeds into that calculus of her.
And it'll end those conversations too, which I was tired of seeing. The whole like, is Galadriel and Elrond in love? And I was just like, I get why people maybe say that because the actors are so good, but I was hoping that there would be something that's like, we have made definitive plans for Elrond, the son-in-law. Like we can finally move that incorrectly. So that was just a good note. And to have those, it's the same woman, but it's a new chapter. Like I think that she's been positioned as like the main person, so to have her now move forward. But continue, Rachel, throw it out there.
I was just gonna say, now that made me think, does she have a daughter already?
It'll be the next Theo conversation.
Right, like you know what I mean. Now that we know that there was a husband and they were married for a long time, I don't. The timing wouldn't work, but clearly they can brush aside that stuff very easily. Like Kelleborn never disappeared for over a century, and Kelleborn was, I believe, born in the Second Age, but couldn't be if Kelleborn has been missing for all that time. She would have had to have been born in the First Age, which I don't know if they would do. But it does raise the question: is like, we didn't know that she had been married. We heard that. Now we're going to get the bomb drop that she has a daughter.
And it's finally. In the first episode, much was made, and we talked about it here. Like, she doesn't actually name Finrod. Maybe they can't. And we only got Finrod in Amazon subtitles. Now we've named him. We've had her declare her house and everything. So things are shaping up, and it has been a wonderful episode and discussion. And I cannot wait for our finale party episode, which will deliver. What I love is that we don't know what it's going to deliver. We knew when the battle was coming. We knew when the post-destruction was coming. We have no idea what episode 8 looks like, will be like, will feel like, and that's exciting and liberating. So thank you for being my companions here today on this journey, filling in for Ken. Of course, Ken will be back next week. He was off in the distant lands of the Forodwaith of New York City, the mountains of New York, out there doing comedy and making people laugh and spreading joy. But he will be returning here. I am Alden Diaz, here pretty much every week doing both of the shows, and you can find me at that Alden Diaz, THATALDEN DIAZ, co-hosting Star Wars podcasts. Nicky is on one of them on Octa Radio, and then writing around the internet and having fun talking about this nerd stuff. Rachel, where can they find you?
At Rachel Cushing Levine, all one word, on Twitter or Instagram. And I'm sorry I haven't been on too many of the House of the Dragon recaps, but it would take a lot for me to miss one of these Rings of Power ones. And I'm sad that next week will be our last one for a while. So
I don't blame you for choosing hope. If there's one that you need to move the schedule around for, I do not blame you.
Hey, the last one had a nice little hope injected into it.
That's true. We'll give a cross-show shout out to Leonor Velaryon.
There you go.
I'm here for it.
And then Nicky, what about you, sir?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Naquicious, NAQUICIOUS. I also do some Star Wars stuff on the Imperial Set It podcast. You can check that out as well.
Yep. And then for right now, just everybody, make sure that you head down to the links below, like, subscribe. You can follow us on Twitter. That's right there. I love these mirrored shots. Boom. At Casterly Talk for the show as a whole. Head down into the links and then find our way to support us on all the podcast feeds on YouTube as well. Tell your friends we're now a partner channel. Thank you so much for following along. But we will catch you next time for the finale.
The Marie.